What's up, everyone? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast. And today is a very special, long-awaited episode that we have been working on getting this done since the inception of this show, actually. For months and months and months, I've been meaning to get my guest on today that you are about to see our interview. I am very excited to share this with you. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this. A lot of people have been looking forward to seeing Ashley come on the program, ask specific questions around her campaign, around her, race with, somewhat so-called moderate. And if you're just listening, of course, that is extremely sarcastic, not the case. I don't find Brian Fitzpatrick to be a moderate in any fashion, and we get into that a little bit in this interview. But I want to say a few things before we get into this, because this is a pre-recorded interview, so we don't have as much chat engagement. We won't be able to follow up on any questions, but if you enjoyed this interview, if you listen to this and you want to see more, you want to see Ashley again, be sure to share this on social media. Be sure to let everybody know, let her campaign know that you saw this interview and you thought you found it informative. And because it takes a lot of time sometimes for campaigns to set aside 30 to 60 minutes to sit down with somebody. So it has to be worthwhile sometimes for them, whether it be financially or getting engagement from volunteers. So if you have the time to volunteer for this campaign, I can't emphasize enough to you how much of an impact you can make. But also, if you can't volunteer but you can donate, that would be amazing. Ashley is a friend of mine. I'll give a little background before we get into it here. Ashley reached out to me in 2021 in my capacity as the chairman of the Democratic Party, and at the time when I was running for tax collector. And we went door knocking together, and specifically she was doing it to help me. And we went back and forth on issue sets. We discussed things, and of course we don't agree on every single policy issue, but the nice part about being in a free thinking country is that we can agree to disagree on some issues, but the vast majority of things that we fight for as progressives is what Ashley represents, and she's going to bring a much better perspective to this seat than the current incumbent sitting in there, which is Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, who has been meeting with Dr. Oz, who is meeting with Jim Worthington, who's one of his major donors and donors to Trump, and funded a bus of people to go to the Capitol on January 6th. So we didn't get to dive into some of that stuff as much as we would like to have. But again, if you enjoyed this interview and if you want to see more, you can do a giant favor by subscribing to the channel, sharing the video. If you see clips, share them and let Ashley know and their campaign know. And if you want to get involved and you don't know where to start, you can go to the description box down below to find Ashley's website. You can donate there, and you can reach out to me directly if you are looking to get involved. This is really, really important. And we do have a real opportunity to flip this seat. So the number one way that we can do that is by getting the message out. And I believe that we're doing that today. So if you believe that you want to support independent, progressive media, subscribe to this channel down below and hit the bell button, because this is how we will get the message out. We are starting with a very small platform. We don't have the money to seed like the far right does and getting these billionaires to donate and just promote their channels. That is not how we do this. We do this with grassroots support like you. So subscribing to the channel is 100% free. Following the show on Apple or on Spotify is 100% free. If you would like to support the channel financially, which would be amazing, you can do so for as little as $5 a month at patreon.com/Greater Society Media. At that link, you can subscribe at different levels, and that would help us, get bigger guests on. Continue to have people like Malcolm Kenyatta and Ashley Ehasz on. So, without further ado, my friend, who, as I mentioned in the interview, somebody that I actually feel like I can have a beer with because we've done that before, because she's an approachable human being. She cares about this community. She cares about Bucks County. She cares about Montgomery County. She cares about the people of Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District. She is one of us. She knows what it's like to struggle. She knows what it's like to fight for this country because she has done it. Now, it is our job to help fight for her and get her elected in the fall. So, without further ado, my friend Ashley Ehasz, running for Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District. Joining us today on the show is Congressional Candidate for Pennsylvania's 1st District in our hometown, Doylestown, Bucks County, Ashley Ehasz, who hopefully will be our next congressperson. So Ashley, thank you for joining us on the show today, and I appreciate you being flexible as we're pre-recording it. The last person that joined me this early on the program was Tiffany Thomas Smith, so you're in good company there.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to make the time for you, and thank you for making the time for me. Really grateful.
Anytime. So we'll just hop right into it. And of course, you're a candidate for office. So the first question that everybody asks you is, tell me about yourself and why you're running for this seat.
Thank you for that. There's a lot to get started and dig into there. So I grew up really in a family that struggled. And we are still dealing with the struggles that a lot of families do. I grew up moving around southeastern Pennsylvania to a single mom, and we moved around so much because we were always trying to stay one step ahead of eviction notices. We also struggled to put food on the table and just pay for heating oil. Those basic fundamental things I watched my mom really struggle with. So that sense of building out your family and making sure you have the right resources to live a good life and a life with dignity is something I've seen firsthand and struggled with my family. And I know we have a lot of families in our community that struggle with that as well. And so to find some opportunity for myself, I joined the Army at 17. I needed an age waiver, and I did so by going through West Point. The way I got into the academy was through my community again. My next door neighbor was a high school teacher who really saw that potential in me and helped me with my application. So that sense of community support is a really strong value in me, and it's something I want to bring to this seat here in our district. And after I commissioned from West Point, I became an attack helicopter pilot. But I think much more importantly, I was a commander. I led several hundred soldiers overseas and here at home, and I saw firsthand my soldiers struggle with things like paying for food. A lot of them were on food stamps, or they had their third kid and they couldn't afford childcare, and they were deploying and they were worried about their families. So those issues, again, that we know people in our district are dealing with, I've already had to solve as a commander. And I look forward to working on those problems now as our representative, God bless it, in November. And I think right now we have a leader who is leaving this community behind. And seeing that, I knew that was my call to action, to step up to the plate and to put even a heavier point on it, especially after what we saw on January 6th. I mean, that was Americans now seeing other Americans as the enemy. And I think it's really important to have young leaders, next generation leaders, but especially veterans now stepping up and running for office and saying, we are not going to go back. We need to heal this country, and we need to bring some common sense to Washington and those who actually want to get things done. And that is exactly why I'm running.
Speaking of where you're from in the southeastern Pennsylvania, tell me a little bit about the district. I mean, obviously, a lot of people that might watch this are from Bucks County or maybe Montgomery County. But tell me a little bit about the district and your Republican opponent.
Yeah, so I will always start with my Republican opponent is now out of touch with this district. And that is something that as I talk about this community, I want everyone to keep first and foremost. We currently have an elected official who is taking votes and making comments that are completely out of line with what this community wants and what this community deserves. And so Pennsylvania's first is, for those who are listening who are outside the area, is geographically just outside Philadelphia. So it's northeast of the city, and it's a really great community. It encompasses all of Bucks County and the eastern portion of Montgomery County. And the really important thing here is we have a lot of new families trying to move into the district and get established and take advantage of the really good schools we have here, the wonderful history that we have here, and being able to live with dignity, as I said before, is something that's really important to me. And our community is getting to a point where we have some really established families, but these younger families are finding it really hard to find root. And it's because cost of living is going up. We have an elected official who's taking votes that are not helping that whatsoever. And now we are finally getting to a point where that is bubbling over and people are absolutely ready for a change. Because Bucks County, Montgomery County, PA-01 at large is moving in a really wonderful blue direction. And right now having a Republican in the seat is not making the cut, especially one who is taking votes that go completely against what the community wants.
Yeah. So your opponent is a self-described moderate. I vehemently disagree with that perspective. I'm sure you might as well. So tell me a little bit about some votes that would distinguish you from your opponent.
Yes. Yeah. Let's start going after that narrative that he gives himself. And let's start with affordability for families here. I've mentioned it a few times, and it's because it's so important. Everyone is struggling right now. So Brian Fitzpatrick, the gentleman I am running against, he saw that families were struggling to make ends meet, and he voted against holding gas and oil companies accountable for price gouging at the pump. He saw the issues, he saw the prices rising. He knew families who, especially those who have to travel for work, were really struggling to afford gas. And he said, that's fine, keep those prices moving up. So when we start really looking at affordability, that's one. He voted against holding them accountable. I would have held them accountable. We can also look at where all that started for him. He voted in support of the 2017 Trump tax cuts. So a lot of what families are dealing with now in 2022 can be traced back to that, which basically that gave tax cuts for the rich. Let's be honest, for the very wealthy few, which is not a lot of the families, especially in the lower part of our district, those tax cuts never reached them. And in fact, they are now facing some of those repercussions. So that is something he supported. I absolutely would not have supported because it only benefits the very top earners there. And then I think that the major issue that is in front of us right now, talking about reproductive rights and also talking about limiting gun violence and decreasing gun violence. Those are two issues where he has absolutely not shown leadership. And I know we're going to talk about Roe a little bit more in a minute, so I will save my comments for then. Boy, there are a lot. But speaking on gun violence, so he has been incredibly reluctant to speak out against gun violence. I mean, we've had, at this point, I've lost count of how many mass shootings we have had, but obviously Buffalo, Uvalde, those were massive and devastating. And in the midst of that, we had Brian Fitzpatrick voting against the domestic terrorism prevention bill, a bill that he initially co-sponsored because he wanted to look like the good guy, and then he turned around and voted against. So that way, depending on which room he was in, he could pretend like he supported their values when really he supports no one's values, let alone the ones that this community has. And when we talk about what are the next steps around gun violence, we can pass universal background checks. We can make sure assault rifles, AKA weapons of war, are banned. And these are things that Brian won't do. So I will pause there because I know we're going to dig into Roe, but those are some of the big ones. Making life more affordable, going after the tax cuts that benefit the rich, and then, of course, addressing the public health crisis that is gun violence.
And not to derail us here for a second, but just to point out I'm a CPA for anybody that watches this. So for perspective, these tax cuts were 2.9% for the top bracket of individual earners, which equates to billions of dollars that you and I did not get, your children did not get in services, and corporate tax rates were cut 14%. 14% when already companies didn't pay their fair share, let alone what they actually, the nominal rates that they're supposed to pay. But even with all the breaks, they're paying from 35 to 21%. So if Netflix is paying less in taxes than you, I think you probably should be a little amped up about that. So
I think that was a great way of putting it. It's all about fairness.
Yes.
And right now we have a system that is not fair, and Brian Fitzpatrick supports an unfair system. Yeah.
So going back, of course, to the giant elephant in the room, and pardon the pun, I guess, but the reaction to Roe being overturned has been pivotal, I think, for leading into this election. How Democrats react. So let's just dive into it. What do you think that Democrats should do? What do you plan on doing? And what has the current Congress maybe been lacking that once you get there, you can help lead forward?
Great question. And I would love to start from a place of how it affects our community, and then really talk about it from there. So since Roe has been overturned, I have had so many, especially young women, come up to me, some of whom have been in tears, and say, please, you need to win. Not just, I want you to win, it would be great if you did. It's a need now, and it's just visceral for so many in our community. And when we look at who it affects the most, in Pennsylvania's first district, those who live at, or the demographic that most lives at or below the poverty line is women aged 25 to 34. So that means those who will be hardest hit by this decision are those who are already struggling the most. And I really want to highlight that, because it's not just me that knows that statistic. The gentleman I am running against is also well aware of that. And he saw that, and yet he voted against codifying Roe v. Wade last fall. So I really want to unpack some of his votes, just to make sure we're crystal clear on what our current representatives set forth for us. So last fall, he voted against codifying Roe v. Wade at the federal level. He has vowed in previous statements to defund Planned Parenthood, a critical provider of a lot of health care for women. And he has also supported legislation that would make abortions really, really difficult, even in the case of threat to a mother's life, and in many cases of rape or incest. So that's what we're talking about when we look at the decisions our current elected official has made for this community. So let's start there. I absolutely would have voted to codify Roe v. Wade. And when we look at what we still can do, if we hold on to our majority in Congress, and I think to get us in safer territory, expand that majority, we can codify Roe at the federal level. We can absolutely get that through. And that will be a priority of mine completely. As a service member, as someone who was willing to, let's put it bluntly, die for our country overseas, to come back home and have my rights taken away from me has been a really emotional experience. So when I start looking at what my priorities will be when I'm elected, this will absolutely be one of them, because I'm not going to remain a second-class citizen in my own country, and nor do I want my community to suffer as well. And I think right now what the Biden administration has done in the recent executive order, especially protecting pills and different pharmaceuticals and protecting the access to those, I think that is a really crucial first step. But the biggest and best thing we can do is hold on to and expand our majority in the Congress, because that is how we can codify this.
Absolutely. And I think for the last maybe month and a half, every single time that we've discussed anything, whether it be the Supreme Court, guns, overturning of Roe, I've talked about literally we have to elect people like you to Congress. We have to elect John Fetterman to the Senate. We have to elect Josh Shapiro to be our governor, because it's all entangled. Like, all of these things are interconnected, and the election is contingent upon this stuff, and it goes from the local all the way up to the federal. So we really do have to focus on who we're electing and what they actually stand for. You brought up, of course, that you're a veteran, and I would be remiss to not ask you about how you feel that has helped impact your leadership abilities. And we did touch on the gun issue a little bit already in one of your answers, but just tell me, just from your perspective, like, how does it affect your leadership? Why does it make you qualified for this position? And as somebody that has literally handled weapons of war, you know, you're an Apache helicopter pilot. Where's the line that we should be drawing to try and stop mass shootings, to try and stop gun violence in this country?
Yeah, those are two great questions, and for me, they're tied together. So my experience in the service was a tale as old as time for a lot of women in uniform, where it was a mix of incredible opportunity, but also some discrimination, and also having to fight through and make your voice heard and be put into these positions of leadership. And I will say the military was, from when I initially joined to when I left, there were a lot more women stepping into leadership positions, and there was this better recognition that women service members do come to the table. We provide a lot of leadership. So when I first started out, I had to kind of claw my way through spaces where otherwise women might not have been accepted. I was one of only a handful that got to go into the Apache course. When I was in flight school and selected that course, I think there were five of us out of several hundred in the class who actually earned a slot in the attack helicopter training, which went on, you know, in the later portion of flight school. And I've shared with others that I faced a lot of threats and harassment online or in person from men in my cohort who, despite not being as high ranked as me in the order of merit list, felt they deserved these opportunities more than I did. And so that was the real first taste of, oh, my presence might not always be welcome. And then when I actually got into the Apache course, I was, of course, the only woman there, and the building, and they've since built another one, so this problem has been fixed. But the building was an old training building on an older airfield, and there's only men's restrooms in it. So I had to wait for everyone else in my class to go, and it just kind of reinforced this "you're not supposed to belong here" attitude. And we have moved very far forward from that. But those were the early experiences that shaped my determination to always have a strong voice in the room. And as a commander, as a platoon leader through combat tours, I really learned how to just say what needs to be said, not be afraid. And something I really talk about, especially when I'm mentoring young women leaders, is sometimes it's easier to get the courage to say the tough thing. Where you really need to have that courage is to stay in the room after you say it and interact with the same people for the hours and days and months afterward. And when we look at what's going on in Washington right now, we need leaders who can stay in the room and have these hard conversations, but then come out of that room with a compromise and forward action. Because I think a lot of people look at Washington and they see this gridlock, this inaction, and that's accurate. We have a congressman who goes to Washington and doesn't really get anything done. He says a lot. He moves some pieces around the chessboard a little bit, but doesn't actually get anything done. And I think people see that, not just in him, but in other leadership. So now when we talk, what can we do about guns? Let's put it bluntly. I think people who want action are seeing a lack of it in Congress. And the recent bill that was passed was actually quite historic in getting movement forward. I think it had been years since action had been taken. So let's acknowledge that. However, it doesn't go far enough. And I do say this as someone who was an attack helicopter pilot. But you know what? I had to train for years in order to be assessed as proficient and worthy of handling a helicopter is a weapon. It is a weapon. And when we look at what we are facing, I want to differentiate the conversation between responsible gun ownership. My brother's a hunter. He takes care of his weapon. He has a young baby girl. He keeps the ammunition separate from the gun and keeps it locked up. And I know there are individuals out there who take that kind of care. However, we have others, as we've all seen in the news, that don't. And that is where we need to have that conversation. So passing universal background checks, holding gun manufacturers accountable for their marketing when they speak to those who might seek to do mass harm with weapons. That is crucial. When you start financially holding these manufacturers accountable, that changes the game, because that puts their money where their mouth is, and that makes it a really powerful piece of legislation. And we need to do that. And we saw previous court action has shown that there is a pathway to that. So I just want to make that clear. That's not hypothetical. We have done it. We can also codify it now. And then let's be very blunt on weapons of war are in our backyards. And I know I'm probably not telling your listeners anything they don't know about that, but hopefully a veteran saying that really puts some weight behind it. Just here in Bensalem a few weeks ago, there was a household where a gentleman had an AK-47, and the police had to go respond to that. So when we start looking at the burdens on our community that these weapons have, it's not only for the individual carrying it, or the family or the potential victims that surround them, but you also are now putting first responders in a position where they have to go up against weapons that I saw in Iraq. And no one should have to go up against that right here at home. So we need leaders who will speak out against that, and of course, elected officials who will vote to eradicate assault rifles from our communities.
I couldn't agree with all of that more. Frankly, I'm just going to put this caveat in here too, because there are listeners I think that maybe, let's just put it this way. You talked about the historic bill that was passed. Even Joe Biden acknowledged that, yes, this is a move forward, but we need to do so much more. So like, I think you and I are both in agreement. Like, there's so much more that we can be doing. But it's important to acknowledge that even the president, who it's his bill, is saying like, hey, we can do a lot more on this, and we have to do a lot more than this, but it's just the first step. So just throwing that out there, because you just always want to like give it that context of even the people passing the bill know it's not enough. So that's why we need people that are going to stand from the perspective of actually handling these weapons in a responsible way, knowing what it's like, and not just stripping the whole thing out from pulling the rug out from everybody, basically. But yeah, we see it throughout. We're roughly in the same. We're both millennials, so I think going throughout school. From kindergarten. I was in kindergarten when 9/11 happened. So from then throughout my entire schooling, we had active shooting drills. We had these lockdown drills. So our generation has been locked into this issue for as long as I can remember being alive, basically. So hopefully we can get someone like you to represent us and fight for real change, so that my brother, my kids, hopefully someday, and whoever's grandkids don't have to worry about this moving forward. So I appreciate that answer a lot. But I guess the last of the policy questions here is, what is one other issue, or however many you want to list out, I guess, but one other issue that you feel like is kind of like a top line issue facing people during this race, and what is your plan to address that issue?
Yeah, I think right now, and this is not just for Democrats, it's independents, it's Republicans, it's Americans. I think people are feeling a sense of hopelessness or frustration with what they're seeing in Washington and the gridlock. And just to unpack that a little bit more, it's a sense of, where is our country going? Am I going to belong to whatever version of our country is when we come out of this election, especially, but maybe 2024 or looking forward? Where's my place here? And will my children have a place here? And so when we start looking at the really big issues we need to tackle, many of which we just talked about, but also our changing environment, our changing climate, which I see as first a national security issue. So starting really big picture. Right now, we are in a competition with Russia and China to develop these green technologies and make sure we actually reduce our carbon footprint, so that way we can provide a world for future generations, but also make sure we're not in a position where we're being outcompeted by these other countries. And we need to make sure we stay on par and exceed what they're doing. So to protect our country and Americans, we need to address this issue. So then bringing it right here at home, going back to families that are struggling, when you have that single mom who's trying to take care of her kids, but who might have drinking water coming into the faucets that isn't very clean and isn't actually providing for them and keeping them healthy so that way they can meet their futures. These are the issues that when you sit around at the kitchen table and you talk to families, they're really worried about these Superfund sites that are in the area. So there's PFAS in the water. So these are the things that everyone is really, really concerned about. And it goes on top of that ability to live with dignity. And I always come back to that because everything comes back to that. Making sure your families here in PA-01 and countrywide can make the right choices for themselves and make sure they are a part of this country moving forward. And they want to see a Congress that gets things done. And I know that's the buzzword right now, but that's it. They see these problems. We're putting families at the front line of dealing with these problems, yet we're sending elected officials to Washington who are really just lining their pockets. And those two things don't add up for me. And that comes back to the core issues core values of mine that I got from leading soldiers. My entire life revolved around taking care of people and their families. And I think the more of those leaders we get in place with that type of value system, the better our futures look and the more we can bring Americans into a really positive future, especially after this November.
You talked about people feeling disenfranchised, people feeling maybe a little bit, despair. I'll take it back to us both being millennials. What would be your advice? And frankly, look, you talked about that age bracket of people that get hit the hardest from Roe being overturned and all these issues. You fit that description. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's crazy. Electing people that represent the people that are affected by policy decisions is important. I mean, I'll get on my soapbox all day about electing young people and talking about how you got to get people elected locally that are young and build up the bench and do all this stuff, right? But what would be your biggest piece of advice for young voters or young activists going into this election and moving forward? Actually, I'd probably say throughout the next 10 years, probably. I mean, you don't have to take it so long, but I know this is I look at it as a very long-term fight here, but what would be your best piece of advice for young people?
Yes. First, starting with, I think it's really important that we elect leaders with skin in the game. And I think and I hope that that's what I represent, whether it's now seeing my reproductive rights stripped away from me. I also have nearly $70,000 of student loan debt that I'm dealing with. And when we look at who can run for office, there are real systems in place in this country to make sure people like you, me, and others who aren't either independently wealthy or have these multimillionaire backers, there's real systems in place to make sure we don't get elected into Congress. And there's real obstacles that especially young candidates have to overcome. And we are doing that here in this campaign in Pennsylvania's First. It's through a lot of determination, grit, and just getting out there and saying what needs to be said. And I think that is something people have really responded to with my campaign because there's no punches pulled. It's, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what I think the fix is. And you know what? That guy currently in the seat isn't doing anything about it. So throughout, and especially after Roe, but even before then, I was seeing a lot of young people coming up to me at rallies and saying, I registered to vote for the first time this year. And I do want to acknowledge, as I'm talking about, get out there and register to vote, please. That is what you need to do. If you want to see change, vote for change. We do know our voting rights are under threat. We have an entire party that wants to make it so that way many people can't vote or have less access to vote. And we need to really talk about that and acknowledge that. So that is something else that getting the right leaders in place this November has ramifications for the next generation, especially when we start talking voting rights. But get out and vote. I know it's really disheartening, but you do have leaders who have that skin in the game. My life was all over the place, buying my first home with the VA loan, having student loan debt, trying to to make sure my new baby niece was taken care of. And so when you look at when should you run for office, for me, I would almost recommend to anyone, the second you start thinking about it more than you don't think about it is the time you should run. And for me, 2022 was it, because I saw what happened on January 6th. I saw what was happening to families here, and I knew that was my call to step up to the plate. So if there's anyone listening who has ever ruminated on running for office, I know there's probably a lot of barriers that will be mapped out for you. Ignore those. Ignore those. Well, let me not be too funny. There are real obstacles, and you need to make sure you have plans in place to overcome them. But we need more young people. We need more ambitious people. We need more big thinkers running for office. So don't be disheartened, but please get angry, get organized, and get out the vote this November.
And I'll get on my soapbox one more time, just for one final time here, and just say I asked the same question of Malcolm Kenyatta on the episode before this, but there are obstacles, but there are people that will help you get over those obstacles as well. If you are interested in volunteering, working for a campaign, running yourself, you just want to get experience, you want to be around a candidate, you want to be around somebody that is doing it, you reach out to someone like Ashley, get that experience working on the campaign. They are accessible. I mean, you talk about people that like that classic, like, oh, I could have a beer with them. I mean, we have literally done that. So like it's Ashley's a real person. Most people that are running for office, I say most because some people are vampires, but most people running for office are just regular people that want to make a change in the community, and they are willing to help you, and it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. So we need people that are going to help Ashley get elected. So you can, if you want to help Ashley get elected, you can come find me, or you could go find her on her campaign. I'll get you plugged in if you live in Doylestown, or if you live in Bucks County, we'll figure it out. But that is the way to do it, and that's how you learn to ignore the obstacles, or to get through them and jump over the hurdles that might be limiting you. So last question for you today. This is kind of just like my generic question that I like to ask everybody, but who or what is your biggest inspiration in your life that is that keeps you going, that drives you every day?
Oh man, this is a really great question. So I actually will give you two answers for the who. I've referenced her a couple times, but I have a new baby niece out there. And when I think of what type of leader does she need to see, what kind of role model does she need to see, and what kind of world does she need to see, that is what drives a lot of the long days and the phone calls and the meetings. And when you're like, oh man, you know, I sit and I take a moment and I say, what would she want someone to fight for? Would she want someone to fight for this versus this? And when I might ever be persuaded to maybe not put in the extra call, or not go to that extra event, or really push for something, I would say to myself, if I don't do this and I fail at the end of the day, can I look at her and explain myself away? So that drive comes from the new life in our family. And I think for a lot of people that's what gets a lot of us going. But outside my own family, when we talk about those who overcome obstacles and succeed at the end of the day and become these incredible powerhouses of mentorship and political force, I think immediately of Stacey Abrams. And when I think of the work that she has done in Georgia and the incredible campaign she's running right now, of course, I really think history will take a couple of generations to really grasp the work that she did in Georgia. And even myself, the more I read about it, oh my gosh, the organizing power. So speaking to another organizer, you know, the organizing power that actually materialized in some victories down there was incredible, the people power there. So I am constantly in awe of the work that she did down there. I think she is a guiding light moving forward, but I think that's one. I'm excited to see the way history really keeps appreciating the work she did over time, and hopefully after she's elected this fall.
Yeah, I was actually just in South Carolina / Georgia, and the ads. Well, I was seeing ads for Raphael Warnock, but and against Herschel Walker. But that style of organizing that Stacey Abrams was using in 2018 has been implemented here in Bucks County in the past. It's been implemented across the country, and like everyone's fine tuning like our specific like flavor of it. But it's important to note that like Stacey Abrams' campaign, and like this year hopefully too, has like almost revolutionized organizing on the Democratic Party. So that's a great answer. I really appreciate that. So I guess in closing, where could people find you? Where can they follow you? How can they get in touch with your campaign?
Yeah, so here's what I'll brag about my team a little bit. So we have an incredible team, and we're growing every day. Last check, we had 15 new interns every day. We get more. So there are so many ways to volunteer with this campaign, and I take a lot of pride in creating a really diverse group. So if you are someone who has never been involved with politics before, who thinks, I don't know what I should say, I don't know what to do, just reach out. We will find you a home here in the campaign. So that can be done if you go to my website, www.ehasd4congress.com. You can sign up through the volunteer tab on our page. And my field coordinator, I know people think like sign-ups just go into this black hole. I actually do have a field coordinator who sorts through all those, and she looks at the notes of what people want to do, and we'll reach out to you. We have also on all of my social media, which is Ashley Ehasz. If you search that, all of my social media comes up. We have different ways to sign up through all of those. So regardless of what platform you're on, you can absolutely find a way, and we will find you a home. And whether you want to come and door knock in person, get involved as an actual staff member on the campaign, or if you feel more comfortable at home, phone banking, writing postcards, we have something for everyone, especially being mindful of the current status of COVID and really adapting to all of that. We're accommodating on all fronts.
That sounds wonderful, and I know you've been responsive in getting people on the campaign, because I know the people that work for your campaign, so I think that's great, and I know that you've been giving opportunities to a lot of people that are really like raring to go, so I appreciate it, and I really appreciate you joining me so early in the morning to pre-record this interview. So thanks again, Ashley, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you on maybe one more time before the election. So if you're up for it, maybe. But
hey, you can have me on anytime. And I will be remiss if I don't mention this. I do want to highlight that we had really good polling numbers that back up the organizing and the fight we're taking to Brian Fitzpatrick. So just very quickly, and I should have mentioned it when we talked about Roe, when Roe overturned, we did assess the impact of taking away fundamental rights of half the population in our district. And it showed me moving 10 points ahead of Brian Fitzpatrick when voters are accurately informed that he is anti-choice. So when we talk about races you should get involved in, this is absolutely one of them. The road to holding on to and protecting the House goes through Pennsylvania's first. So I'm really grateful for this time and to talk about the message here.
We're in a bellwether right here, and it's a big swing when people find out about that. So get out, volunteer for Ashley, and I will put a donation link in the description of this video. So go down into the box. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can find it there. If you're watching on YouTube, it will be in the description box right below my head. Go down there and click that. Donate to Ashley's campaign and help us flip this congressional seat, because we deserve to have a leader like Ashley in this seat. So Ashley, thank you one more time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Connor. It was my pleasure.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. If you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the bell button while you're down there to get notifications of every time we go live or a new video or clip goes up. You can follow the show on Instagram and on Facebook, Greater Society Media. You can follow me, your host, Connor O'Hanlon, on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for the audio versions. And you can make a difference and help independent progressive media grow by helping us on patreon.com/Greater Society Media. For as little as $5 a month, you can make a difference in putting great guests on the show, helping with graphics and paying for the editing that we need to do for the show and for future promotion. So, and if you can't do any of that, but the most important thing that you can do is share clips and share the show. That is 100% free. So you can help by doing that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you want to do. You can cut this video up and do it on TikTok. I don't know how to do that, but maybe someone in the Gen Z generation, not the millennial boomers like me, can do that. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this interview and you want to support Ashley's campaign, you can do so in the description box below. You can find her website and you can donate to her campaign. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you next week. Stay safe. Peace.